All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This is our ongoing series of conversations with Leger's academic committee, and this is our last one before the summer. So I hope you've enjoyed the ones we've had, and we will start up something again back in when we're into the fall again. Very quickly, I'm here today with Dr. Guy Lachapelle. He's the professor of political science at Concordia University. And more relevant to today's talk, he is also the director of the Center on Values, Attitudes, and Societies. He has been a longtime friend of Leger and on our academic committee, and we're glad to have him working with us. Dr. Lachapelle is going to take you through some work he's been doing on the World Values Survey, talking a little bit about the structure of it and then some of the details that have come out of it. We're going to go for about half an hour, and then we're going to open it up to questions afterwards. If you have a question, if you notice on the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A tab. The chat tab shouldn't be working. Hopefully it isn't working, but the Q&A tab will work, and you can enter it in there, and we'll have access to that. So Guy, I'll turn in the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Dave. So welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I don't know, it's a beautiful day in Montreal, so it's a warm, summer is coming, so we have to be optimistic about that. So today, what I essentially want to tell you is more about the World Value Survey. Canada, what I managed with my colleague essentially in the last 3 years is the wave 7 of the World Value Survey. Canada is back to the World Value Survey. We were not part of that in the last 10 years. So it's important because it's a survey that is the most internationally used, I will say, by all scholars, and there's many publications on that. So as Dave mentioned, our study and our center has been financed essentially by and the survey by the Secrétariat aux Relations Canadiennes of Quebec for Canada overall. So it's interesting that this time the center was at the heart of that, of looking at other type of surveys that we are doing also, but it's essentially to create that networks of scholars who are working on different thematic related to the World Value Survey. This is some of the key issues that I will probably try to present to you, but as you will see, we are not going to go all through these, but I will go very quickly on some key elements that I think are just important to remember. First, the World Value Survey is history, structures, and methodology. This is a global research project that has been start in 1981, especially with my colleague Ronald Engelhardt, which had a chance to teach in his class at Ann Arbor at some point. Ron was quite interested about the North American values, first of all, I will say, in the early 90s with Neil Nevitt, Michael Bazanias in Mexico. So they were trying to do some North American data. This is how I get interested by that. But what's more important is that overall is the long time series. So you have more than 120 countries and society participated to the World Value Survey. There's also the European Value Survey, which has started earlier. But the more important point for you to know is that all the data are available online. And this is what you can get access. It is quite an important element. You can look up any questions and the questionnaires and compare the data of Canada with any other country. And this is the value added of that important surveys that has been constructed over time and years. It is still, I will say, a good start before you want to go on a more detail in your own country. But you can build anything, you can go over the answer, and you can compare with the other country, which is quite important for us in terms of comparative analysis. So, and it has this dynamic element, which is to be able to compare against across. So you just go on the World Value Survey webpage, and it is totally free. So you have a data collections, and this is why I joined that essentially when I was Secretary General of the International Political Science Association. I saw the colleague, and at each World Congress, we had this discussion over the change of the score in some country and over. So this is at the art, and from these data, there's discussion at the IPSA World Congress each 2 years now. So a quick fact. The survey is done each 5 years, so it's over a 5-year period. We just finished the wave 7 that we have done in 2019, 2020. So now we are even ready to start to search for funding for the next wave. Will be done the next 4 years, essentially. So so that's important. So the rest of the point, the national type of countries, 100 countries, time series data over 41 years, over 600 indicators that you can use. The World Value Survey Association itself, which is based in Austria, there's over 30,000 publications of colleagues. And this is one thing why, Mike, I joined on that and tried to do it, because my Canadian colleague were using that until last 10 years, and everybody were telling us how important it is in their career, and especially younger scholars, to use these data and for data analysis. So here is the number of countries for each of the study, the year from 1981. The last one, we had 85 countries, 135,696 respondents, which is huge in terms, even if the wave 5 was much higher, but it's still, there's countries who still have difficulty that we don't have, but that's important. And the sample varies from 1,000 to 5,000. For the Canadian one, and I will come back to that later, as you will see through the data, we added one thing. Instead of having just data for Canada itself, I would say a sample of 1,000, we decided to do with the regional elements. So the provinces have been added, and we oversample for having, and we have over 4,000 respondents. So it's important, and Ronald Engelhardt was strong on that, because it's a study on values, and values did vary a lot in North America, as we know, even between region and in Canada. So the label, the state label, I will say, it's becoming over the last 20 years maybe a little bit less relevant from a scientific perspective. I think from a political perspective, we know what is a country, but beyond that, the values are changing, and because some are closer to some neighbors' country or whatever. The importance of the World Value Survey. There's 2 important dimensions, and you will see the cultural maps of the world, what we call the traditional values versus the secular rational values. And I will insist on this slide a little bit. The traditional values essentially emphasize the importance of religions, parent-child ties, traditional family values, and people who embrace these values also reject divorce, abortion, suicide. This is more traditional values. The secular rational values is the opposite preferences, favor divorce, abortion, euthanasia, suicide, and so on, at different level. The second element is the secular traditional values, in the sense of survival values, place emphasis on economic and physical security, and self-expression values, which are priority to environmental protection, growing tolerance on foreigners, gay and lesbian, and gender equality. You see the polarization of that is on the graph that you will see where a country stands. And what is important is that Engelhardt, back in the 80s, his idea is that country will probably move to become more post-materialist, which means emphasizing more collective values, and that individual values will disappear. He was right in part in some country, in other country less. And as you will see, things that are changing, and depending on the countries, and I would say the political situations. Here is the map for all the countries. You see Canada fit, just the data, Canada fit as among the English-speaking country, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain. So it's just in the middle between Protestant Europe and Catholic Europe. So this is where we are in terms of secular and traditional values. This map is done at each wave of the World Value Survey. So we have a moving map, but I don't want to show you that, but you can see the movement where Canada moved and throughout that, but it's pretty much relatively the same thing, but you can see the change over time. Then if we had provinces to that, Quebec fit as Protestant Europe, closer to Germany. The rest of Canada fit more to the Catholic Europe. That goes against what most people think, that Quebec is Catholic, the rest of Canada is Protestant. Nothing to do. It's in terms of values here. And Quebec, and I've seen that in all my surveys in the last 20 years, we're much closer. I always say we are more closer to the Nordic values and German values, which are also the traditional social democratic country. Canada is quite often closer to France, Austria, and this is what we have observed also in the past. So the regional component that we are adding now to the World Value Survey is important because we can understand. So the figure of Canada is really a mix of these two cultures, if you want, that are put together and create the Canadian data. I understand some people in Canada quite often are, especially in the Western provinces, are criticizing the kind of a domination of central Canada, I would say, Toronto, Ontario, Quebec, but there is differences that should be made, and that's not new, and we can discuss that, how we can improve our methodology on that. So just to put it in short, Quebec is higher in Canada of secular values and also in self-expressional values. And here you see the data for each of the Canada score overall is 0.83, but Quebec over 208, and the score for self-expression is 108 over 242. So you can see the versus traditional versus self-expression value. So we see the differences that Quebec seems to have a different behavior on, but there are some provinces which are much closer, I would say, and British Columbia, for example, is at 85, is second in line, and so we can explain the interest now is to maybe our data we over sample for the regions, and but there's more to be said about each of the region in Canada.
Yes, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. I find it interesting the similarity of Ontario and Alberta on this scale.
Yes, absolutely. I think the figures are, well, as we will see, I think Alberta sometimes fit a little bit more with Quebec on some, I would say, more work ethics or other values, and Ontario is about the same. So there is differences. This is just on secular point of view. For example, Quebec is not very high on religions, and people would tolerate more couples who are not married than others. Where in Alberta there may be less tolerance on that or acceptance of that, I would say. So there is variation. I will not go too deep on comparing British Columbia, for example, Alberta, Ontario versus Quebec, but clearly these three provinces versus look of Newfoundland at 0.35, which is pretty low in terms of traditional. So they are much more traditional in some of their vision in the traditional aggregate. So against this data, it's the sum. The aggregate is the sum of all the questions that you have to build on, and this is the algorithm that they use at the World Value Survey, and then they try to build that. But it's a sum of things. So it's hard to overall. Yes, you're probably right in saying, okay, Alberta is at 0.81, which is closer to the average of 0.83, which is Canada overall, where Quebec score at 108 on 242 on survival. So it's a mix of details. We can come back on that. We don't have too much time, but we'll go on. Okay.
Sorry, just keep on going.
Yeah, I just want to give you another example before we go. Religions across the 81 countries in the World Value Survey, China range at 1.73 is the lowest in terms of mean of salience of religious life. And Indonesia is probably at the highest. Canada is at 2.14, which is closest to not very important category. And Canadians fit more if you look on the map just on religion: France, Finland, Hong Kong, Switzerland. And Canada overall ranks 69 over 81 countries on these indicators. But when you go by regions, Quebec has the lowest, 1.869, and Alberta has the highest, 2.318, where Ontario is at 2.27, Maritime 2.28, so, and British Columbia 2.11. So the Canada mix is much more closer, if you want, than where Quebec is. It's not really relevant in the religion at these times. So this is how you can interpret all these data that I will show you next. It's just on different values that it's how we fit. And again, it's the numbers together for the cultural map is a sum of all of these differences or peculiar answers from all the regions. But what is important to remember, I think that's always been clear in even previous surveys, that just to remember when Ingillard did the first, I would say, really in Canada in the early 90s, his book on the North American trajectory was on the data were Keynesian data, but they make footnotes all the time saying Quebec is different. And just remember the political time, Quebec supported heavily the free trade agreement, where the rest of Canada was a bit more cautious, I would say, in terms of supporting the Mulroney proposal at the time. Okay, values and opinions. So I will just, the details now is just what you saw, some of the cultural map. So it's some of the question. And here, most of the table, what I try is essentially to show you by provinces, and you have the table from Quebec and the rest of Canada. So you can see the differences, and as you do it, you can see with the red number the differences between Quebec and the rest of Canada. However, you can see in some provinces the numbers are much higher. Here in this slide, I just want to emphasize work, for example. The question is for each indicate if it's important in your life. Quebec is 10 over at 82% to the rest of Canada. The average is 75%, and the rest of Canada is 73%. So that's probably explain the closest figure for Quebec with Germany, for example, where also Germany work is important, probably more in the Protestant values and work, but the Nordic countries is the same thing. It's pretty strong and pretty high, even if the US are much lower at some point. So politics, and we'll see that, is in general, there's other data will show it's how, but in Canada, we are pretty interested, I would say, no differences. Religion, however, the last one, that's why I just get on. In Quebec, religion, it's not important for Quebecers, where in the rest of Canada, it's 39%. So Quebec is becoming, I would say, a non-religious state in a way, because it's probably among the lowest in Canada, and certainly in Canada, but even among other countries where religion is not at the heart of the society. Role of men and women in society. There have a lot of questions. If people on the question is you agree with all of these things? One interesting here is when a woman works for pay, children suffer. That's an assertion. In Quebec, we disagree with that more than the rest of Canada. So it's here. It's a kind of family values, where the other ones are pretty much the same. So that's also interesting. So there's, of course, that explains also, we'll see later on, the importance of equality between men and women in Quebec, which has been a different in some of the policy that you know on daycares and others. That's one reason it's been quite supportive. Agreement about some effort about variation. If it's there should be an equal pay for everyone, or is the individual effort to be rewarded? You have a mix, but when it comes to you look by provinces, I think on these questions, there should be more equal pay. In Quebec, it's at 5.2, in the rest of Canada, it's at 5.6. So So closer it is to one, it's closer to the statement that you have in red. So it's so Quebec is more moving that, the rest of Canada 5.6. Privatization of companies versus state ownership. Again, you see Quebec is state ownership more, privatization. Those values are, the question next is the government should be more responsible for providing for everyone needs. Yes, for the rest of Canada, each person should be more responsible for providing for themselves, if that's more where Quebec stand on that. So little differences like that show a trend. I would say that why Quebec is again more on the Anglo-Saxon side. Other tolerance, I would say here, it's a number of questions on homosexual couple or as good parent and other couples, for example, just to start with this one. And you see where Quebec stands, 79%, and 70% of the rest of Canada. Work is a duty for society, 61%. And the rest are pretty much the same, but again, it's just, when you see a difference, I think it just explains why Quebec is, and the rest of Canada seems to share different values or approaches to life and society. Quality of life in Quebec and in the rest of Canada, well, people say that it's they're relatively satisfied with their life, and so Canadian seems to be relatively happy, I will say, when I compare with other countries. Even there's some little differences, but overall, people are relatively satisfied. Okay, we can improve quality of life, of course, of all citizens, but so far there's no big oppositions to what we see in terms of their satisfactions. Immigration in Canada, again, here, is it good or bad? Very few people say it's bad. Most people say it's quite good. It's overall for Canada, it's what we are. I don't see the pictures is on the slide, but it's overall we are pretty good. The differences here is Quebec people feel it's very good at 65%, and the rest of Canada 56%, and quite good 49 to 38. So Canadian versus rest of Canada on immigration have a different position, and that's important in the debates over immigration. Quebec want to control its immigration, but also they want to people integrate. I'm not going to go on the political debate between multiculturalism versus interculturalism. That's another philosophical discussion, but it's more in terms of the practical means and how. So people, yes, feel that immigrants is important. And in Quebec, as you will see for, is that they offer, what is important is that that bring, we should have, give access, having refugees and other people, because it's important for the economy. And in Quebec, people are saying that, yes, we should have more immigrants at the right time. And again, it strengthened our cultural diversity. Everybody in Quebec will agree with that, 81%, 71% the rest of Canada. So we have been quite, we are accepting as Canadians or Quebecers the coming of immigrants. I think it's part of our culture. So that
I also find it very positive, and we work with the Institute for Canadian Citizenship. So I like to see these sort of numbers. We're a partner with them as well. But I like to see the age, the 18 to 34-year-old category is also more positive towards immigration and the effects of immigration, and more aware of that. So the next generation is even more importantly seeing the importance of this aspect.
Yeah, and I think that's the trend. The question is, we are living in a world where, again, there's greater access, I would say, to people travel more, have know people better, they have friends elsewhere. Not necessarily on Facebook, as we know. People usually have people who are the same on Facebook. There's not. When I ask a question in my class, how many if you have friends outside Canada on your Facebook account, very few more than 5%. It's really low. So we still live in our, I would say, close environment, family, personal ties, and so on. But on that point, you're right, David. The thing is that, yeah, immigration is there's a values for that, and Canada's a tradition, I would say, on that. Even we have not been very good in after the Second World War, things have been changing, but it's a peaceful country, and this is in all standards, so it's important. What approach a government should take now? I think that's the one I had in mind. Let anyone come who wants. People will, but the preferred option is let people come as long as there are jobs available here, and 66% in Quebec and 50% in the rest of Canada. Place strict limit on the number of foreigners who can come here. Canadian at 37% are saying, well, yeah, we should have some limit, and it's not. Quebec is at 31, so it's in our political debates. I think that's important that people do realize, and I think politicians, that there is limit also that I think citizens understand about immigration, and also to, if we welcome people, to treat them well as well. So it's a part of always the dilemma in the way of when we want to bring immigrants in Canada. Security, your financial situations, overall, I think people are pretty positive in that. You look, the figures are 66 for remain without a cash income. It's rare for most of the people. So there is a question of, but there is still I felt unsafe from crime in your home. There's still 20. There's number of people were probably in the gray zone, so 22%. That's where it's rare or never. But there's still the figures are 13, 11. So people who are they feel that their situation is pretty nice and safe. However, there is differences between region, as you can see, and this is why it's about crime and beyond safe. In Quebec, it's 9%, but in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, it's 16%. So so there is regional differences about, and it's Ontario's at 12%. I thought, well, Ontario first will probably Toronto be pretty taking all the weight of that on that. So there is again the perception might be different from one province to the other. Do you feel secure these days in general? So the total not secure is 26%, and the total secure is 74%. So I found that pretty high in general, based on the impression you got sometimes through the media and everywhere. And in Quebec, total secure is 86%. This is enormous. I found. Of course, you might say it's problem mostly in big cities, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, but and the rest of Canada, it's 70%. So Quebecers feel relatively safe compared to the rest of Canada. And total unsecure, it's 30% the rest of Canada and 14% as it is. But it's and again, it's Ontario then, and not very secure, 27% and 28% in Ontario and Manitoba, Saskatchewan, which is the two highest. And Quebec is at 12, of course, because the other numbers take all over. Question of freedom and equality. What is more important, freedom or your equality? People in Canada, it's freedom. In Quebec, it's equality. I found that just on that too interesting. I think they translate that kind of, I would say, social democratic value, maybe some more liberals' value, in the sense that there's a clash here between that can be translated in many ways, but it's essentially we see that freedom has its limit and equality has its limits as well. So you have to figure out. The next one is more security versus freedom. And again, security come on top in Quebec at 65%, where liberty and freedom, it's at 53% in the rest of Canada. So, and you see the differences. Security is important. The 65 is pretty high compared to all the other provinces, and where freedom is at 35%. The other provinces, on average, there's no much difference between provinces. So, again, a kind of different perspective here, probably on the type of government. Societal values. This is the post-materialist index of Engelhardt. I'm not going to list all the three next slide, essentially, but it's what do you prefer and what will be your priorities for the next 10 years. Of course, there's question like make sure this country has strong defense forces. Does not really apply. Quebec is at 22%. It's always been low on that. I've been using the post-materialist index for years, and Quebec is always much lower on that question. But of course, when you do it just for Quebec, we don't have a defense department, so it's different, but it's overall perceptions and where it stands. So I had to modify that when I do it just for one province and not survey across Canada. But on all the other things, the last one, try to make our cities and countrysides more beautiful. This is environment. This is question of post-materialist value. Quebec's high on that at 35%. Rest of Canada 24%. So you see again again between those materialists and evolution of post-materialist value. So I'm going to skip that. Except maybe the first one, a stable economy. 74% rest of Canada, 62% in Quebec. It's not the real priority. And again, you see that clash between liberal versus social democratic, I would say, values, and where progress toward a less impersonal and more human society. This is post-materialist. Quebec stands eyes on that, which is a kind of post-social democratic values. Religion, we discussed that. The question is, how important is God in your life? There's a debate in the House of Commons these days on that, but about the praise and the prayers and how what we should say, but not important at all in Quebec. It's 42%. This is the figure you saw before, and 33% the rest of Canada. So it's very important. Only 21% of Canadians think it's important, but you see there is a variation here. In Ontario, it's 32% for not important, second, and British Columbia is 42%. On that point, religion is not probably people say it is the Chinese immigration and others that probably figure out, and closer to the Chinese figures that we saw previously in China as well. That's not a culture where they've been a traditional, but Quebec is. I'm not going. Quebec is closer to China, but it has certainly some similarities. So Quebec is certainly not in the last 25 years as religious as some commentators sometimes think about those values and are important. Belief in God, Quebec is only at 41% when Canada is at 61%, the rest of Canada is 61%. Life after death, Quebec is 51% who believe in that, 59% rest of Canada. The heaven, Quebecers don't believe there's a heaven, 32%, 53% rest of Canada. And the hell is the same, 19% in Quebec and 40% rest of Canada. So you see here a clash on religious beliefs. And I think my colleague, Sarah Laflamme Wilkins, she works at the Waterloo University. She is a specialist on religion. She has been looking over all of these data over time. She has 2 books coming out just on this aspect of religion. So when I was telling you that we are focusing on, colleagues are working more specifically on some set of questions which are important. Okay, with pretty similar on these things. Politics, democracy, human rights. I know time is going fast.
We're okay, Guy. We're okay, Guy. Keep going. You're good.
Good. Interest in politics. Total interested. You can see Quebec is at 59. Atlantic provinces at 58, where Ontario is at 65, and the average for Canada is 62. So Quebec is just a bit lower. Canada is 64. So there is a difference. statistical difference, but it's so we might say, well, Quebec is always more interested by politics. Not necessarily. It's not because there's a kind of there's been more requests or more demands from Quebec over time, the Quebec governments, that let's say means that Quebecers are necessarily more interested by that. They might be also a bit tired sometime on that. So there is evolution of that. And not interested, that's 41% and 36% for the rest of Canada. So it's pretty. Citizenship. This is a traditional question that we're asking between what we call your national identity, whatever you say, your territorial identity, the country where you live, or your continental identity, such as we live in North America. So this is the kind of question that from the Angular survey that I've been asking since the early 90s, at the time of free trade, when I started to look at that. And this is on North America, for example. Canadian and the rest of Canada is at 67, Quebec is at 62, but at the time of the free trade, it was much higher. At the beginning of the free trade agreement on that, Quebec was, and there has been a decline on our North American identity because starting in the early 2000s with George Bush, the war in Iraq, there's different factors, and the Trump administration and some of the attack against Canada and the free trade and the way we administer things. But overall, you see Canada is at 73% in Quebec. The national identity, Quebec has we know a strong national identity, and 89% the rest of Canada. So we can explain that. Your village, town, and city, pretty much the same. The sentiment of local politics, the importance of your locality, and that's also viewed in the regular model as an element of post-materialist value, the saying we're closer to our people and people live. So on that point, I think that's important to take that into account. The world, there's no differences between Quebec and the rest of Canada. It's 50%, so it's pretty much the same. So that's for identity. Jobs. Are you working in public institution versus private institution or industry? Interesting. Private business and industry in Canada is 58%. Quebec is 44%. Government and public institution is 35%. Quebec 26%. That's something we know. It's the state is much more present. There's more people working for the state and against whatever program has been put in place. And against that traditional of against the social democratic tradition that where Quebec fit when you compare to the Canadian data on that point and on the overall cultural map. I think it just translates that and it's pretty, and it has an impact. I know colleagues are working on that, on vision of society, the role of the state, and so on. And finally, on the financial well-being, average is 6.4. People are relatively satisfied about their financial situations. Quebec a little bit more, 7.8 at 48.38, and giving a score over 7. So it's pretty much the same, I will argue, probably across Canada. But Quebec is at 6.8, so it is on average higher than the other provinces, but the rest is 6.1, 6.3. So I think we are still in a kind of a relative satisfaction of Canadian and citizens over their financial situation. Of course, we can always be better, but people seem to have a certain confidence. That's what I was asking and telling you before, essentially. So this is it. I'm ready for questions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Guy. And there are, if people want to submit questions, please feel free to do that. I just want to, just a couple of questions that came in, and I want to talk a little bit about something. I really find the slide interesting when you were talking about God and the House of Commons request, and the fact that came from the Bloc Québécois was a request to take prayer out of the weekly meeting, which aligns up very well with the values survey that you have here. I guess the main question, and I've got some texts about this, is you talked on the larger cultural map chart that you showed at the beginning. And yeah, just so Dominique O'Rourke is just asked the same question that I'm going to ask. How are you seeing things shift? And you talked about Canada hasn't changed much in its spot, but obviously within those dynamics, within what we're talking about, we're seeing some changes to this. So what's your perspective on how values have changed over time?
That's a good question. I think if we define values as a way to adapt or change attitude over time, and how values affect decision making. I told you before, Dave, that in the past, the key question we asked for 20 years was the question of identity. How do you identify yourself? But identity is the outcome of values and attitude on some elements. And we gave up a little bit, I would say, what is the Canadian identity? I think we had discussed that for years. When I was student in the US, the answer was by Canadian usually was because we have a healthcare system and because we're a little bit different. Yeah. Well, but that's well, the healthcare system has suffered a lot, I would say, over times, and people are still much concerned. The survey, we have done it just before the COVID-19. Okay, that's important. Things are probably different today, and I will see for the next wave. But I really wanted to do that at that point. We were like the British and others at that situation, not to talk about the Brexit in Europe, but the values are, in general, in Canada. Canada has been really on the middle ground state, as we know, and on values. Values are changing relatively slowly in Canada, maybe because of the dominance of some of the liberals and conservative in power. So, and the last 20 years, we've seen more minority government, which was supposed to be impossible in the British parliamentary system. So it just proved that there is a shift of that. It's the catch-all party does not exist anymore. Very difficult to attract, get the values of each people, but how it's affect your politics, that's another question. The Social Democrats versus Liberals values, for me, it's not new. I think I've seen that in polls on Quebec, comparing other, and this is why I really enjoy doing this one, because it's the first time that we can compare provincial. I've been working on that. My dissertation 30 years ago was on comparing provinces, and I was going to say all provinces are distinct in their way. It's just that we have, I hope, well, I'm not going to make a political statement, but I will, which is that I don't agree. I did not understand what a distinct society means, essentially, unless you tell me what it is and you explain what it is. And British Columbia has been some point similar to Quebec. In the past, we were saying that Alberta, Quebec has the same recrimination against central governments, and that was true, but it's, again, the values is a sum here in this world value survey to bring the cultural maps, is trying to see what seems to be common or more prominent in some region or some country in the world. And that's what you can probably show Dave and send the moving map from 1981, where you see the movement of populations towards some European values versus North American or liberal values. So my point, I would say, we are moving. The environmental question, what Engelhardt was thinking, is that we have seen a lot of data saying environment is important. Yes, it is. Even when you ask what is more important, but when you ask what is more important, usually economy, healthcare, they come on the top still. The economic values are still on the top, but it's still, environment has not catch up at the same pace, I would say. And there's the fundamental questions. And Engelhardt spent a lot of his career working on the religious values, for example. But clearly that has gone in part. The question is how Canada will redefine itself with new immigrants and other or new religions, whatever it is.
So like you talk about the identity related to values. I think there's always this concern about what's going to happen to Canada because we live so close to this large southern neighbor of ours, the United States, which has different identity and different values from us. You see on their chart, they're a little off on that.
Mhm.
And for example, we just released a poll this morning talking about Roe versus Wade, and almost half of Canadians, 46%, think that the decision in the US will end up impacting us here, will end up changing how we operate. So, how does being so close to a different value system or slightly different value system impact us here? Are we slowly being dragged in the direction of the US, or are we maintaining our middle ground?
That's a Canadian dilemma for years.
Yeah.
Since the free trade, since I've been looking at that, I know the concern over the Canadian identity with the US is much higher than it is in Quebec. And the reason is the cultural difference in Quebec. People in Quebec feel very much secure because of the language difference with the US in part. And saying, however, under the Trump administration and others, Quebecers started to consider a little bit that, yes, we are affected by the US as well. So there is different, for example, the best example for me is the Convention on Cultural Diversity, which I tested in 2000. Canadian and Quebecers were strongly in favor of an international convention where culture should not be put as an element of economic elements in terms of. So on that ground, but the difficulty for the rest of Canada is that to accept or not because there's certainly a concern about the influence of the American cultures on the Canadian culture. The debates over our Americanizations is another question, which is not new. I would say it's back in the 30s. It's always been there, but is it what it shaped Canadian culture? My answer will be no. It's up to governments and our institution to defend whatever we feel is our own identity and important for our cultural or values in the future. So on abortion, it's a good example where it's not the first time. Roe and Wade has been attacked in many, many years. This time it seems to be still a possibility. I will put it that way, that some state will probably act. But then what will be the position of the Supreme Court in the US is another question. But even there will be certainly some change on that in the US. Is it going to affect our policy in Canada? No party at this point, I think, and no Canadian would like to see a reopening of this debate in Canada as it is in the US.
So I have two last quick questions, Guy. First is a methodological one. When you're talking to people who work in research, you're always going to get something methodological. Someone's just wondering, we saw a variation in the participant countries. Mm-hmm. Why do you see like a drop in some years and an increase in others? What's been happening on the global country scale to have people pull in and out of this?
Money, question of dollars.
Okay.
Essentially, it's a very simple. Some firm have changed over time, over years. In some countries, more difficult to raise money. A good example, why France is never there. They never got someone ready to do it. And I found that strange. I think maybe Léger should open an office in Paris. It's quite unbelievable some countries are not there. But this is explaining the variation. It's simply a question of the capacity of each country, or sometimes some divide.
And when they have resources, and when can they fund it or not fund it, and that's why they pull in and out. Last question, because I'm cognizant of the time here, and we promised people 45 or a little over, but this is what you and I were talking about while we were waiting to go live. We have a question. Does any of the data point to potential solutions to address increasing polarization, or at least what appears to be an increased polarization in society?
Well, the polarization is about more what is democracy we were talking about, and also from I would say individual versus collective values versus social democratic values versus more liberal values. These kind of is there a solution to that? That's to politicians to do it. I guess we are here to notice the differences, and then it's to politicians in each region and each province in Canada to decide what is the core values, because the sentiment of the local elements is important as well. Canada is a sum of what is in I would say in each of the the region in Canada. Everybody has different challenges and how they see the future of their region, their relationship or economic relationship. So all of this, I think in terms, things evolve and society are changing. And that's, I always said to my students, what's more interesting is to see change over time and trends, because that's what the Engelhardt and the Wiesel cultural map is talking about, is looking about what's moving on for the best or for the worst. But that's another there was a set of questions on leadership also, and the capacity of leaders. Of course, probably leaders should be more the trust on leadership is a major problem from a political side, and Canadian seems to look elsewhere in terms of getting from their some organization or other who are taking over and over governments that they feel governments are maybe still too far, and they should be more closer to people in general, which is what we expect from governments in general. So I will probably more advise a political leader to touch ground and put their feet in the mud, and that's how it will work.
Guy, thank you very much for today. Thank you everyone for joining us. This recording will be available shortly. You'll get a link to it as a thank you for being here today. As well, as Guy has mentioned, the World Values Survey, it's available online for you to download, look at the data, work with the data. It's a very interesting database of what's going on within Canada and within the world. For everyone who works with Leger that's on, or as a Leger employee on this, we will have our second talk at 1 o'clock with Guy, just to answer any more additional questions from us as part of our learning for our staff and the people who work with us. For everyone else, thank you very much, and have a great day. Thanks again, Guy.
Thank you. Merci.